Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a little bit of content that's different than what I normally do, because I normally do real estate content, and I do have a couple home improvement videos that are on my YouTube as well that seem to be pretty popular. So I thought, heck, if I've got one of these that I got to check off, you know, I might as well make a video on it and make some content for somebody else that might have questions about how to do it themselves. Now, I had an older wooden door right here that was here when I bought the house. It weighed a ton. I was instructed that it needs to be more insulated. We need a better door and something that was a little bit less drafty. So we ended up with one of these doors with the blinds built into the glass. The only caveat to this is that my house is a concrete house. It's an older home. It was built by my grandparents sometime back in the day, apparently when concrete was cheaper, I guess, to build with. So these are actually cinder block walls, not wood. So there's some different things that you kind of run across with that. You've got a much thicker wall to deal with, and you can't exactly just hammer into it like a normal one. So take a look along with me as I figure out how to put one of these doors in by myself. Now, whether I did it wrong or did it right, this is how I did it. Here we are installing this new door into my house. For whatever reason, I don't know, this is my grandma's old house. They built this thing out of concrete, cinder blocks. That means the walls are thicker, and it's a pain in the butt if you ever got to hang anything on a wall. You know, can't just use a nail to hang a picture. You got to get a hammer drill out and drill the wall, and it's a whole ordeal. So, of course, it's going to be an ordeal putting this door into a cinder block wall as well. I started out by taking out a lot of the screws that were in the frame or in the hinges themselves, because a lot of times they have longer screws in parts of them that might be holding the frame in place. I swear, I think this one door was as heavy as my new steel door in a frame by itself. It's a solid wood door, and it was beefy. What I was surprised at when I got to this, I'm not really sure what was holding the door frame in. There was a huge, probably 1-inch gap between the cinder block and the frame of the door. No shims, no nothing, no insulation, just a nice drafty airway coming straight through into our house. Next, I started taking off any of that molding that I could get to. It just pulls out of a kind of a groove. So that I could kind of see where my pry points were, what parts of the molding I needed to start prying on to try to get this frame out so that I could get the new frame in, and what exactly was holding it, since it appeared to just be sitting there. I also had to carefully start chipping away here at where the tile had butted up against this transition piece or seal. Unfortunately, I knew I was going to have to break some of them. Luckily, I didn't break any of the big tile, where it would have been a mess. It doesn't look like I'm being gentle, but I'm trying to be as gentle as I can and not pry against the big tile and get this thing out of there. I wasn't really sure what was holding it, if it was glued or nailed or screwed or whatever. I didn't see any screws. I honestly think it was just the grout from the tile that was holding it still in there. So it's time to get that frame out of the way, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was holding it in place. Now I kind of think the flashing on the exterior of the door, there was a strip there that was nailed into the frame of the door, which was probably 90% of what was kind of keeping the door frame square and in place, which I quickly upset here the balance of. Then I didn't really know what I was going to do with my flashing. I got a guy that can come and do flashing for me. He's kind of my do-all when I can't do, but I knew I was going to have to have him come back in and at least do the exterior, since it's kind of special equipment. Once I finally got this frame out, then I could kind of tell more about what was going on. This is the messy part, the beating, banging around. Concrete was flying. There was some mortar that was chipping out and coming out of there. There's some grout from the tile that was in there. Luckily, after you kind of got the frame out of the way, that was the majority of the messy parts of it. Or at least the parts with the hammer where stuff kind of went flying. So I got the frame out of my way, but I also noticed that the screen door and the frame is in my way. Now if you ever take a screen door off, they're pretty easy. They got a strip right here of plastic that covers up the screw heads. So all you gotta do is remove that little plastic strip, expose your screw heads, and unscrew the frame, and it should come right off. Don't worry, I also replaced this old rusty light we had outside here too for something a little bit more up to date. No, unfortunately it didn't come right off. Some moron, which I'm not going to point fingers, but they decided to caulk the frame on, I guess, to close up the air gap in there, and well, it didn't come right off. Now I decided to use my oscillating tool with a metal blade on it to just cut right through this flashing and get this piece of wood and flashing out of my way, because the door was not going to fit with it where it was at. I figured my flashing guy could just come back, slip a piece of flashing in there where the other piece is, and just flash right over the existing flashing. Now come time, I need to put something up to actually mount my frame of my door to, so that it's not just hanging out in midair like the old one was. I had enough room on each side of the frame. I'd already kind of dry fitted in there that I could tell that these boards were going to fit, and I got some Tapcon screws with a concrete drill bit, and was going to just bolt this to the concrete so that I had something to screw the frame to. I use this 3/16 I'm gonna call it a countersink bit. I don't really know what they're called, but I used it as a countersink to kind of sink the head of this Tapcon screw below the wood so it would all be nice and flush once I got it drawn up next to the concrete. I couldn't just use the frame as it was, so the door is going to actually sit into the wall a little bit further than a normal door would. So this little frame that was around the edge of it that you could just throw up into a normal wall and then they sit nice and flush, of course, was not going to work for me. Now we were finally ready to put the frame into the wall. First thing I did was level up this sill plate. According to the instructions I could find online, that was the easiest thing to do. And I also had to kind of raise it up higher than probably the average person, because I had this tile floor that it needed to sit flush with, if not slightly above, so that the door would actually open. Once I got that in and used a few shims to kind of hold the frame in place, I opened the door and used it as kind of a prop to keep the door upright as far as the in and out goes. This helped me where I'm not fighting it constantly and the door wasn't going to be dragging once I got it in place. Putting a few shims underneath that door helped me level it up in this direction. And then of course you also got to check your level this direction too, so the door isn't just opening or closing on its own. Now these small gaps you see on the side between the white and the treated lumber is where you're going to put your door shims so that the braces up this frame. You also want to make sure you put those shims especially behind the hinges, and each hinge will have one long screw that anchors it to that outside frame. Now we had to insulate that frame. Those gaps had to be filled for getting rid of that cold draft. Ended up getting some of this expanding foam to fill up this bigger gap. It wasn't as big as I thought once I got the foam in there. It filled it up pretty quick. But I also had these smaller gaps that I used closed cell foam rope, I guess you would call it, and kind of pressed it into these gaps, close them up. Now one issue I had was that the tile kind of was in the way of the frame setting all the way back into the wall. So I had about a 1/2 inch gap between the flushness of the wall and the door frame, and I used this little strip here to fill in that gap where my molding is going to go and where the door is, so I didn't have some kind of gigantic gap there. I mitered the corners at my molding going around the door. One tip or a couple of tips I could give you on that, not that I'm a molding expert, is to take a square and with a 45 and check your 45, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's square going across the board itself and not like at some kind of weird angle. Also make test cuts to make sure your angles are right. Just because you cut a 45 and a 45 doesn't mean your door frame is actually at 90 degrees. So I used painter's caulk to fill in the long gaps where molding meets, and then I use spackle to color in to fill in any nail holes. Just personal opinion, but I think the spackle doesn't shrink like the caulking does. I've used caulking in the past and it seems to shrink up into the holes, and then you still see them even after you paint. One nice thing about painter's caulk is, for one, you can paint over it pretty much right away, if not just a few minutes of dry time, but also it's water soluble, so all you gotta do is just wash it off. It's not like your silicone bathtub type caulks that gets on your hands and is possible to get off. It took me about half a day to get the old door out and the new door in, but not completed. It took me about another day to do the molding just because I ran out of time, and sometimes I have other things to do. All right, I hope that was informative. I hope you got some kind of value out of it. If you've got any questions, leave them down below. I'll answer what I can, or what I maybe think the answer might be. And if you got any comments about what I did wrong, heck, leave those down below too, so maybe someone else can learn from what I screwed up. For right now, the only thing I got left to do is paint the molding and waiting on my flashing guy to finish up the outside, and we'll call it a wrap. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you check out this video too, and I'll see you in the next one.